Following the first public flight for Halo Infinite, our feedback and data was collected by researchers at 343 and structured into a list of themes and talking points in the community. This list was then shared internally with the various developers and artists at 343, and following this, 343's community team then wrote up a report for us about what was discussed internally and how our feedback was received. Wow, that was a handful. Let's go down the list, shall we? If you enjoyed the video, leaving a like, subscribing, sharing the video, etc. helps the channel grow. And of course, it feeds that hungry YouTube algorithm. You guys have been doing an awesome job lately, and let's get started. In general, the accessibility team were really happy to see how inviting the Halo Infinite experience was for those who require accessibility options. Things such as full control remapping and support for the adaptive controller meant that the game was much easier to jump into for a portion of the community. Stories were even shared on social media and my own comments section about how far the glowing outline system went in making the game easier to play for those with visual impairments. There was, however, a strong desire for the game to have an auto-sprint option, like most games on the market. For those with motor disabilities, these automated movement settings help make their gameplay experience smoother, and the lack of this option in Halo Infinite was noticed by them. There was also a desire to customize other things such as damage indicator colors and spotting markers. The team said that they won't be able to create these for launch, but it is part of their post-launch support plan. In general, folks seemed to like the music of not just the main menu, but the ambient and reactive in-game music. There was also a lot of positivity in general surrounding the audio experience, particularly in regards to the return of iconic sounds such as the plasma pistol overcharge or the shield recharge sound effect. Though some weapons such as the Needler, the plasma pistol's primary fire, and the gravity hammer drew criticism for drifting a bit too far from the audio identity of those weapons. The team identified a desire for the Needler to take on a more glassy and crystallized sound to reflect its, well, glassy and crystallized nature. No complaints from me here. The Needler is typically punctuated by a rather juicy and jewel or crystal sound, so hearing Halo Infinite's Needler was quite odd because it was such an audio mismatch between the visual of the gun and the sound effect that it made. I'm also hoping that they're able to draw out the gravity hammer's impact sound a bit more. If you didn't know any better, you'd assume that the gravity hammer of Halo Infinite was just a really heavy box falling. In Halo 3 and Reach, the gravity hammer was this alien device that released an unstable energy wave that disrupted and distorted the atmosphere around the impact site. It's magnetic in nature, ionizing the atmosphere and sending objects flying. This is a sound that classic Halo captured very well. This long drone, it was this magnetic implosion. Hearing the hammer of Halo Infinite just do this flat bang was really silly. They also saw a lot of requests for more in-depth audio options for the voices of the AI characters, the announcers, the players and stuff, which the multiplayer team did agree with, and we're going to discuss that in a bit. The live team were incredibly happy to see the positive reception of the permanent Battle Pass, but there was quite a bit of confusion about the challenge system. So in a rather big change, XP in Halo Infinite only comes from challenge completions. In order to get XP in this game, you have to complete challenges. Whereas in past games, you could just play the game and passively get XP, and then if you wanted to complete challenges for extra XP, you could do that as well. They're monitoring the community's, in my opinion, natural annoyance at this undesired change, but they did clarify that Halo Infinite will have an obligatory complete a match challenge that will always be available, meaning that you will get XP at the end of every single match. In my opinion, this seems like a band-aid fix and only seems to dilute the importance of challenges. So in Halo Reach and Halo 4, playing the game just gave you XP. A challenge was exactly that, a challenge for extra XP. If XP for Halo is like a cake, a challenge should be the icing on top of the cake, something extra to go for. So for Halo Infinite to so badly misunderstand what a challenge is and how it added to the experience of leveling up feels really strange to me. They did say that they're going to be improving the progression system as the game is updated post-launch, but in general, I wasn't too happy with some of the answers here. And also that post-launch comment. Starting to notice a pattern? We're going to be hearing a lot more of that as we go on. In general, the response to the bots was really positive. People loved how a lot of work clearly went into making them feel human-like and natural to fight. Bots are seen as this excellent training tool to learn the ropes of the game, and in terms of feedback, there was a sentiment that the bots were maybe a bit too accurate with their grenades and weapons, more so than any human player realistically would be. The bots also tended to get a bit confused when navigating the map. In a gunfight, they seemed okay, but when on the move, they'd get hopelessly lost or jammed up, all going down the same lane of a map. The team did say that they're going to be toning down that 4D level chess planning and placement of their grenade throws, as well as the accuracy of their weapons, but they did want to make sure that the bots stayed difficult to fight against, because keep in mind, during this flight, we were fighting bots on pretty hard difficulty settings. They're also looking into improving the bots' map navigation, making them flow around the maps in more organic ways. They also addressed a desire from the players to have a more esports style bot behavior setting. And the multiplayer team did say that even though they do want the bots to be seen more as sparring partners, a training tool, they will look into a possible setting that does try to honestly act like an esports player post-launch. So in my opinion, I don't think the bots should be locked down as exclusively a training tool. I think the bots can be a lot more than that. The thing about a training tool is it's something disposable. You don't always need a training tool, and once players feel they got a good grasp on the game, they're gonna move on from the bots and never look back. I want the bots to be designed in a way that encourages us to constantly interact with them. As an example, the worst part about infection for some people is playing as the zombie. It sucks to just run at a player and die over and over and over again until you finally infect that player. Could you imagine a game mode where it's just a tunnel and all of the zombies are bots? They will come after you over and over again, and they will never complain, they'll never quit the match because they're artificial people. They'll happily do it, no complaints. They'll play whatever dumb, bad game mode you have that puts them at a disadvantage, and they'll do it with a smile. There is a lot of gameplay value that bots can bring to Halo Infinite's multiplayer. And so 343 to view the Academy, the bots themselves, as just this training tool, I think it's a shallow way to look at what the bots can add. General sentiment was that the weapon drills were a great idea for testing weapons. Players enjoyed using them and sharing the high scores they got in the firing ranges. There was, though, feedback about maybe teaching the alt-fire modes for the weapons a bit more clearly, and allowing for the ability to swap between drills faster, and possibly even having new modes such as equipment training or an unlimited firing range mode. The team is already looking at better ways to teach the nuances of weapons, as well as adding drills for vehicles, equipment, etc. post-launch. So, in my opinion, something that I kind of found a bit puzzling about the firing range was that the structure of it didn't really suit a lot of the guns, if that makes sense. So let me explain myself. The beauty of Halo Sandbox is that these guns aren't in a bubble. The assault rifle is designed to be used not on its own, but with your melee, with your grenades, and even other weapons. The Ravager's alt-fire mode, where it lays down a blanket of fire, is useful as a way to delay enemy advances into an objective. The plasma pistol drains shields, but then, because it's not that lethal, you should swap to a headshot weapon to clean up. So is a weapon drill that wants you to get kills with a plasma pistol the best way to teach a new player how to use the plasma pistol? I think that the firing ranges could be a bit more creative in their structure. The firing range and the Academy in general has a lot of potential, and I'm actually excited to see how it grows and evolves. Halo Infinite featured a new radar system that only showed a player when the player sprinted or fired their gun. Most players seemed very confused by this new radar system, and so the multiplayer team is actually reverting the radar back to its normal, classic motion tracker. So going forward, all motion is picked up on your tracker, with the only way to stay off of it being crouching, moving very slowly, or standing still. I don't really have a hat to throw into this ring, so I'm curious about how you feel. Everyone has their own opinions on the motion tracker, and I want to hear yours in the comment section below. It seems that people responded extremely positively to their own little AI buddies. People seem to enjoy that Master Chief Cortana fantasy being brought into the multiplayer. Most of the feedback that came from people actually revolved around a desire to have more control over them, how often they spoke, if they could be muted, more options for colors, voices, personalities, holographic avatars, and the such. So, some stuff such as adjustments to the frequency of jokes and quips, and a preview voice option will be actually available to us in the next flight, and the team is planning things such as hats and props for them. But for post-launch, they want to give players more options to fiddle and tweak the AI's personality, such as being able to just mute redundant dialogue or modifying the kinds of dialogue they'll deliver to the player. Seeing as this is the player's personal artificial intelligence, the ability to personalize that AI into a presence that you enjoy working with online is important, and it's exciting to see that 343 is going to be giving us a bit more flexibility. During the Halo Infinite flight, I found my AI buddy to be a bit annoying. He'd be telling me when I picked up a weapon after I consciously made the choice to pick up a weapon. Sometimes he'd be talking over important sounds that I really needed to hear. I wanted a way to mute him because he did kind of like the sound of his own voice a bit too much, so I'm looking forward to some of these options. The medals of Halo are important. It's never not fun to hear Halo's iconic announcer, Jeff Steitzer, smoothly announcing our accomplishments like some buttery form of ASMR. General sentiment was that the medals for Halo Infinite were really cool. New ones such as the 360 no-scope medal especially were loved. Players also liked how the event feed would call out when players achieved certain medals, and the only area of criticism was the art style of the medals themselves, which didn't seem very medal-like. The art team then whipped up an artistic refresh for the medals of the game to bring them more in line with the classic games, and these new medals are much juicier to look at. I'm a big fan of the new Ninja medal, personally. Okay, I've said the word medal too many times, now it sounds weird in my mouth. Medal. The Sandbox team is definitely very keen to gather as much feedback as they can on the glowing player system. So the overall goal of the glowing is to provide ways for those with certain visual needs to play the game better, and of course show off player cosmetics and microtransaction purchases. And while it certainly did seem to be doing its job, it's got issues and it's not perfect, and the team is aware of that. Folks in general felt that the shield flares did a poor job of properly communicating the state of a player's health, and the lack of a way to just disable the glowing was also seen as a negative. The team is working on improvements to the shield visual effects, as well as fixing a bug that prevented player gamer tags from showing above players' heads. But as for options such as disabling the glowing, those might not be included until after launch. They said to keep giving feedback and alternative ways to tell friend from foe, since it helps give them ideas for us to customize our visual experience. So in general, I found the neon glowing to be, at best, just a bit visually ugly, and at worst, genuinely confusing in the heat of the moment. When too many players grouped together, I found that it was kind of hard to separate who was who, since the neon glowing would kind of bleed together. Sometimes I actually had to wait until players separated before I could say, that guy is glowing red, I should shoot him, since you can't tell who is who by looking at the color of their armor. I'd personally like for a way to just simply enable a full armor paint job so that I can look at the armor and tell who is who, rather than trying to interpret this artificial HUD glow. There's a reason red versus blue worked in the past, and there's a reason soccer, football, etc. uses team colors. In general, response to aiming was not great in the flight. On console, players reported pretty sluggish and unresponsive aiming, and on PC, I can confirm that it was really hard to play with a mouse. Players also felt that the default sensitivity was far too low, and that the lack of axial dead zone tweaking for controllers was a negative. Now, the team is tracking a variety of bugs that were affecting not just the performance of the game, but also aiming inconsistency. And they also wanted to let us know that they have upped the default sensitivity and allowed for axial dead zone tweaking. That's pretty cool. If you're wondering why aiming is such a heavy topic of discussion around Halo Infinite, it's because of an issue from Halo 5. So Halo 5 was notorious for this problem that the community referred to as heavy aim. Well, Halo 5 had very fast and responsive input latency, actually beating out its brother and sister shooters on the market at the time. It suffered from heavy aim, which, depending on the load that your console was under, or even your connection to the online server, your sensitivity and aim assist would actually fluctuate and modify on a match-per-match basis. The heavy aim problem could seriously impact your gameplay on one map and then not do it on another map. It was a very odd bug, and it was so deeply rooted in Halo 5's core engine that it couldn't really be properly fixed, even after an update that 343 released to try to address it. And seeing as the slip space engine that Halo Infinite is using does actually have its roots in the Halo 5 engine, the aiming of Halo Infinite is under heavy scrutiny by both the community and the developers, because nobody wants heavy aim to rear its ugly head in this new game. The developers are very keen on any and all feedback we can give about aiming and would like to continue to hear our thoughts in future flights. Now, before they finished up on the aiming discussion, they did take time to clear the air on Halo Infinite's zoom system. So Halo 5 had a system called Smart Scoping, but in the game's code it was more honestly referred to as what it was: aiming down the sights. Any and all guns in Halo 5 could be aimed down the sight, which improved their accuracy, their range, their recoil, and their spread. Halo Infinite is actually ditching Halo 5's aiming down the sights in favor of something more inspired by the classic Halo zoom system. So if you have a precision weapon in Halo Infinite, it can scope in, providing a variety of benefits, but if the user does take damage, they will be knocked out of their scope so that precision weapons aren't too dominant and you can disrupt their aim. If a gun does not have a scope, the player has a simple camera zoom. This won't change your accuracy, this won't provide any buffs. All it simply does is zoom in the camera a little bit, and I'm very happy to see Halo 5's aiming down the sights is gone. Halo in general feels healthier without the aiming down the sights mechanic. This was an interesting one. So overall, people seem pretty happy with the weapon balance, with the ability to toss weapons to each other a la CSGO being greatly appreciated. Two main areas of criticism, though, were the sniper rifle and the skewer, which felt a bit hard to use. Now, the team is hoping that the aiming tweaks will dramatically improve how these weapons feel next flight for us. So I saw people in my comment section saying that they wanted a bit of a nerf on the sniper rifle's zoom level because they felt it was simply too high when they were playing the flight. I actually disagree with the idea of nerfing the sniper rifle. Something I think is worth considering is, did the sniper rifle belong on the map we were playing on? In my opinion, not. The map we played on was really small, and the sniper just didn't feel like a right fit for it. Games like Call of Duty, Destiny, Battlefield have every gun on every single map at all times, so the game has to constantly be rebalancing its sandbox. The beauty of Halo is that isn't the case. Not every gun is on every map. So it's okay to look at balancing Halo less around how can we tweak the statistics of a gun, and balance it more around which guns are appropriate for which maps. Not everything requires a rebalance. Just something to think about. Moving on, the next point of this breakdown was actually kind of interesting. So, okay, a bit of context. The Act Man a while ago said that he greatly liked the Infinite Hammer because in his opinion it felt more unique than previous hammers, which he described as just being another form of the energy sword. This sentiment was then repeated in the community's response to 343, but on the other end, you actually had folks in the Griffball, speedrunning, and classic Halo community kind of upset by the Halo Infinite Hammer, because mechanically they found it to be kind of shallow compared to previous hammers. The multiplayer team for Infinite has noticed this feedback, and sadly they've just decided to do nothing in response to it. The hammer's staying as is, and that's kind of disappointing. So where do I stand? I actually agree and disagree with the Act Man's sentiment. So the idea of the gravity hammer having this slow wind up and then this huge area of effect is kind of interesting. But where I disagree with him is that previous gravity hammers were just another energy sword. They weren't. The gravity hammer of Halo 3 had utilities that extended beyond its simple melee attack. Of course, you could hit people with its melee attack, but then you could also throw objects around the environment, throw your friendly players up to high ledges, even throw yourself around the environment. If you ever look up Halo 3 speedruns, the gravity hammer is one of the best mobility tools in the game. The hammer wasn't just another energy sword. It was a gravity manipulation device that could be used both against other players and in the user's benefit. Okay, there we go. Hey, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, that was a half-court launch right there. Like, you were on the midline and I landed, like, I could very easily just run that in. I needed to take like one step and it would have armed.
As it sits, mechanically, the Halo Infinite Gravity Hammer has less mechanical utility than the Halo 3 one. Some of it may be due to bugs and glitches, but its gravity effects seem very inconsistent or sometimes non-existent. But when it comes to map interactivity, it doesn't do a whole lot, and it simply cannot self-launch the player. When you combine that with the really flat sound design of it, the Infinite Hammer feels like quite a step back from even the Halo 3 one. Something is wrong when your gravity hammer has no gravity effects on the world around it or even the user swinging it. Halo's movement has always been a contested topic, with sprint in particular being a hard thing to balance for the series. Since sprint is not native to the Halo series' combat loop, its inclusion has always led to a disruption in the flow of combat, removing the player's ability to move in all directions at max speed, and when you do that, you're unable to fire your gun. Infinite's new sprint mechanic is an interesting new approach to the issue that sprint caused in previous titles. So, instead of this full-blown sprint that moves super fast, it's more of a jog state the player can enter, and generally, the new sprint system was well received by people. But there were also those who found it to be a bit clunky. It's worth noting that the Infinite Flight had a lot of position warping and rubber banding, so the team is working on trying to figure out if that clunky report is in relation to the netcode itself and the warping issues, but they're going to keep us updated. Infinite Screen Shake was also a point of criticism, that even when being set to 0 in the options menu, the screen would still shake quite a bit. And fear not, the settings were actually a bit bugged this flight, and they should be working properly next time we play it. I was actually pretty happy to see that Halo Infinite's new movement system was liked. I found it to be slow and strategic enough that the map design and the sandbox had a bit more breathing room compared to Halo 5. Importance was shifted off of crazy and unpredictable player mobility and back to the external mechanics of the game. And that's why I play Halo. I really enjoyed the movement of Halo Infinite. The equipment system was also well received by folks, in particular, the grappling hook. Something that I think makes the grappling hook really cool actually is due to the fact that it had limited uses and must be fought over, you don't spawn with it. I remember during a match, looking at my HUD, seeing that I had one charge left on the grappling hook and having to make a conscious, tactical choice about if I should use it now or save it in case I might need it later. Making the equipment this finite resource that can be used up makes each deployment of it important. Something I didn't feel with Reach's infinitely recharging armor abilities, or Halo 5's enhanced mobility mechanics. An area of criticism from the community, though, was that the drop wall deployed too slowly and that the wall itself was too weak. So the multiplayer team is approaching this subject with caution, because one wrong move in the balancing and that drop wall could accidentally become very annoying and disruptive. A get-out-of-jail-free card anytime you're taken by surprise. They want the deployment of this piece of equipment to be a thing that the player has to plan around, rather than something that they can just spam in the heat of the moment to save their skin. So they're not going to be touching the shield strength, but for now they did speed up its deployment time a bit, and they're going to be monitoring how this affects combat. So feedback around the HUD seemed to be a lot more varied. Plenty of folks liked the new HUD. Plenty of folks were confused and frustrated by the new HUD. And of course you had those who were just indifferent to the changes, which in my opinion is a valid position to take. You don't need to care about everything. But across all these different groups of people, one major area of criticism most seem to agree on was that the weapon cradle, as it's called, that spot on your HUD where you can see your inventory, was just too small and hard to accurately read while the game was in motion. The team will be exploring options to improve this post-launch, and the inability to see your secondary grenade was also criticized, which the team will be addressing, again, post-launch. Tons of fan mock-ups for the HUD were created. They were these classic-inspired HUD layouts with more clean and readable HUDs, and the multiplayer team has looked at them, and they all agree that the HUD could use some modularity for those who simply don't like the new changes. I appreciate Halo Infinite's desire to change things up a bit for the sake of onboarding new gamers not familiar with Halo, making the HUD resemble something that you'd see in other shooter games. But as a Halo fan, I never really got used to this new HUD. It felt odd to not have all of my tactical info neatly organized at the top of the screen next to each other. Instead, have it spread out all over the screen. I'm looking forward to seeing what solutions the team comes up with. It's a pity that it has to be post-launch, though. The main menu presentation for Halo Infinite was well received. There was some desire for the menu to adopt, as the community put it, a vertical grid like Halo 5 rather than a horizontal grid. So I found this to be a bit interesting, since what I disliked most about Halo 5's menu was that it was a horizontal grid system. Infinite's main menu is very similar to Halo 5, lots of scrolling from left and right, where I found that Reach's menu and Halo 4's menu, with the drop-down system, being a lot more enjoyable. There were also a lot of bugs with equipping things in the main menu and just having to sift through sub-menu after sub-menu. I personally gave up trying to interact with the customization system due to how buggy it was during the flight, but I'm glad to see that 343 has noticed these issues and they're going to try to improve them by the next flight. Alright, wow, that was an interesting read. It's good to hear that the development team in general is so in sync with many community desires and wishes, even stuff such as the HUD and allowing us to further customize and tweak the glowing system and the personal AI. But something I wasn't too happy to hear about was the term post-launch, repeated over and over and over again. Most of the promises that I read about were really exciting, but after Halo 5, these are just promises. I'd rather have a complete game at launch, not 3/4 of the game and an IOU sticker on the main menu. You know? A problem that I ran into with Halo 5 was that I really played it a lot at launch, and I actually ended up burning myself out. And by the time that Halo 5 was patched into a game that was worth my time, I had already played my fill and moved on. And I don't want the same to happen with Halo Infinite. Either way, it's going to be interesting to see what changes do come in the next flight. What did you all think about the outcomes report? Let me know down below, and I'll see you guys on the next video.